logistics off the top. We will be recording this webinar, so those who weren't able to join can listen at a later time. And also, everyone, all attendees will be muted during the webinar. However, please, if you have questions, include them in the chat box, and we are monitoring it, and we'll certainly address your questions as we go along. So with that, I will do a brief introduction. This is Bill Hennigan. I'm the director of the center, and we have with us today Dwayne Brown. He's a CID technical assistance provider and the deputy on the Common Education Data Standards effort. We also have with us Maureen Wentworth. She's a manager at Ed-Fi and of strategic partnerships with the Ed-Fi Alliance. And they will be taking you through the information today on our collaborative work. To get things off the top, what I want to convey is that this is actually a very unique collaboration of resources that we are undertaking here with the Center for the Integration of IDA Data and our work on Generate, funded by a grant from the Department of Education, the Office of Special Education Programs, in collaboration with the Common Education Data Standards. And those that know about Generate, and we'll elaborate on this, know that we are using the CEDS model for our work with support from the SLDS program at the National Center for Education Statistics. So those two efforts are contributing to the resources that are making this work happen. And our partner and friends at the Ed-Fi Alliance contributing to this effort and funding from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation to do the work and outline the efforts that you will hear Dwayne and Maureen talk about. So, what we're really, it's an effort to bring interoperable solutions to state education agencies to do their work in a more efficient manner and to allow them to submit quality data and to actually have more time to work with that data for improved educational outcomes. So that's the whole effort. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dwayne, who will take you through the agenda. And Travis, yep, you can move the ball to him. Dwayne, take it away, sir. Thank you.
Great. So for the agenda, we're going to take a look at how these various different programs, technical assistance organizations, how those intersect and how they come together through CID, CEDS, and the Ed-Fi Alliance. And specifically, we're going to talk about a project that's being worked on that brings the three of these together, a collaboration and connector project. And then we'll finish up with any questions that you all have. But before we do that, we are actually going to take a poll. And do I need to turn the ball back over to you, Travis, to do that? I may have to. I will just do that just in case, and then you can give it back to me. Just because we have three different technical assistance centers on here, organizations, we want to kind of get an idea of how familiar you are. So go ahead and answer those questions there on the right if you would. Should just take a few seconds. And then you got about 10 seconds left, and the poll will close itself, and we'll kind of see how familiar you are with CID, CEDS, and Ed-Fi. All right, it looks like the poll is closed. And then Travis, I'll probably need you to hand the ball back over, or I can take it back. We have the results showing. There we go. So pretty good mix, it looks like. We got several very familiar, some no answers. That's okay. But some not at all familiar with CID or CEDS or Ed-Fi. So it's kind of what we thought may take place on this. And so the reason we're going to actually go through and kind of introduce CEDS, CID, and Ed-Fi just real briefly, so you have an understanding of each of these programs or technical, whatever they're called. So you have an understanding of what they do because the outreach that went out for this webinar went to various different groups and to followers of those groups, and so we knew we would get a pretty good mix. So we're going to start off with CIID to kind of get an understanding of what CIID is. So CIID is the Center for the Integration of IDA Data, and it's a technical assistance center, as it says there, funded by OSEP. The Office of Special Education Programs funds this technical assistance center. And it has a very unique goal, a very unique mission, and that is to help states, state education agencies, integrate their IDEA, that's special education data. So IDEA Part B, Section 616 and 618 data, there's other sections, so very, very narrow focus there. That specific data, Part B, 616 and 618, in with that general education data in their SLDS. So the reason being that you have special education data is often siloed in other places, and there's three primary goals for having that data integrated. One is it helps to reduce resources that are spent managing all of the various different components of the data, all the work to bring it together at different times. If that's automated, if that's integrated, you have better data quality, that's another reason, and then you also have the reduction of resources, and then finally, ultimately, you have the ability to improve outcomes for kids because you can see all that data, you can answer questions that you have, you can make better informed decisions to improve the outcome. So CIID is all about developing resources that provide that direct support to states. And another unique facet of CIID is that it actually can come alongside a state and not just tell them the work that needs to be done to integrate, but they can actually help do the integration. They can become an additional resource for the state, writing code, helping with ETLs, doing that sort of work. And one specific project that we're going to talk about today is, as part of this collaboration with Ed-Fi, is the Generate tool. And so CIID has developed an application. It's a web-based application. It's locally installed at a state, and it is built on the CEDS data standards. So the structure of that whole application is the Common Education Data Standards. And it's at it's student record, so that's why it's locally hosted. It's not anywhere in the cloud. No vendor has it. It's something the state can actually install and have locally. And the data source that populates is an SEA's SLDS. So the ability to integrate that special education data from the SLDS all into one environment that's built around CEDS. And then that tool itself can produce the EDFACS files specifically around IDEA data. So there's several EDFACS files that are specific to that, as well as 4 different assessment files. It also can produce some reports that help you build the SPP APR, and then additionally, many states came together and said if we had all this data, if we had data related to EDFACS, to these specific EDFACS files, if we had it all inside of a system, what other things would we want to know about this data? What questions could we answer? And so there's also some state design reports that, as the name says, states designed to be able to use that data and look at it in different ways. So that's the Generate tool. A little bit about what it does, and then you'll begin to understand as we move later on in the presentation where Ed-Fi is coming into this mix here to help solve one of the challenges that exists. So you have there on the left side the state's existing systems, SLDS, which could be a very broad term. SLDS means a lot of things to a lot of people. Really, it just means you have your data somewhere inside your state system. Out of that, we need to extract it, transform it at some point to look like CEDS, and then we put it in the Generate tool into a CEDS operational data store. So it looks like CEDS at that point. That's where now we have standard data. And so from state to state, all the data would look the same because it would be in that same structure. So the existing state system, the SLDS unique structure, and then when you move it into the operational data store for CEDS, you have standard structure. And then Generate does the magic behind the scenes of the ETL of being able to turn it into a reporting data store with flattened data and makes it a lot easier for the system to process and produce reports. And then out comes the EDFACS reports and the user-friendly reports that help you understand and interpret the EDFACS reports, and then also those state design reports that we talked about. So that kind of in a nutshell is Generate. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit, but that's one of the products that CIID puts out. These are the reports that Generate currently produces. You can see there, I won't go through the entire list, but all of those have an IDEA focus. The assessment files that are kind of on the right side there, 175, 178, 185, 188, they have their focus comes into IDEA because IDEA is an indicator on that particular file, and so that's an important factor for IDEA and OSEP. So those files are there, and then also the indicator reports that can be produced out of Generate are listed there as well. And then one additional thing to know, so the first 16 that I just listed there, those are the IDEA Ed-Fax files that are currently available. To kind of know what's happening as far as implementation and what states are doing, we piloted this with the state of Nevada for the 16-17 school year, and just pretty much wrapped that pilot up not too long ago with the assessment files. And then in the school year 17-18, we will again work with Nevada, but then we're also bringing on West Virginia, New Jersey, Oklahoma, and Kansas, who will additionally begin using the product to submit their child count this March, April timeframe when it's due. They'll submit child count and then go through the entire year with the rest of the files going on into the fall. And then the school year 2018 and 2019, we'll have Mississippi, Nebraska, OSSI, which is Washington, D.C., and then the state of Washington coming on as well to begin doing that work. And then there's a couple additional states, too, that are being added as well, but we aren't fully there yet with those. So those are the states that are currently in the process of installing, getting ETL work set up, looking at their SLDSs, finding the source data, and going through all of the various different work. And CID is helping to do, can help with the installations. It helps with the ETL work and the various different things, mapping your source systems over to CEDS. So that is that. There is additionally, the SLDS program has sponsored and is supporting 17 additional files. So as I mentioned earlier, we have CID, which is IDEA focused, and so their mission and their goal and their funding is related to IDEA. SLDS, though, which has a different funding source through NCES, is working to provide funding to build 17 additional files. So for the Common Core of Data, things like your directory file, for CSPR2, so things like LEP, you have migrant, direct certification, pre-reduced lunch, that sort of thing inside of those 17 additional files that is being built and Generate. So all in all, which I can't do the math, somewhere over 30 of the EdFax files will be in place by next year inside of the Generate tool. So that is CID. So for those of you who are not very familiar with CID, kind of gives you a quick high overview of what that is. CEDS, which I mentioned when I was talking about CID, is the Common Education Data Standards, and that is basically an education data management initiative to help you understand education data across P20W. So when I talked about and also it's funded by the National Center for Educational Statistics. So it was developed and built by you all, really, out there. You specifically might not have been involved, but it was SEAs, LEAs, vendors who continue to build and contribute to and manage the Common Education Data Standards with over 1,500 different elements, from preschool to early childhood, K-12, post-secondary, workforce, assessments, competencies, learning standards, any element related to education data. CEDS has it in there and has defined it. And when I talked about CID and that data store that CID has, that's built entirely on CEDS. So while the focus of the Generate tool might be IDEA data, it wasn't built in a way to restrict it to IDEA data. So very forward thinking from OSEP allowed that to be built with a structure that could do anything from early childhood all the way through workforce. Their specific focus being IDEA data, and that it could come out and produce those IDEA EdFax reports. But again, with that focus of integrating all of the data, integrating special ed data in with everything, so that you can get those answers, you can get the outcomes, you can understand the data better, you can have better data quality. The actual CID tool contains every element that CEDS has inside of its structure. So that kind of gives you a quick brief overview of what CEDS, and I will let Maureen talk to Ed-Fi, who is from the Ed-Fi Alliance.
Thank you, Dwayne. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I appreciate you putting your answers into the poll. It looks like we have a pretty even split of those of you who have a familiarity with Ed-Fi and those of you who are probably questioning what in the world that logo is. So I hope to give you a high-level overview of the work of the Ed-Fi Alliance, and happy to answer any questions. Feel free to pop questions in the chat or message me directly with any questions if you want to go deeper. As you know, implementation is a challenge, whether it's a policy or a technology. Implementation is always challenging. We in the education space have been working towards standardization efforts like the CEDS work, leveraging that standardized vocabulary and language to really ease implementation. And what Ed-Fi's hope is to do is provide some tools to do just that. And so in 2012, around 5 years ago, the Ed-Fi Alliance was launched by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation to provide an opportunity for states and districts to support implementation of a standardized set of technology that would get to interoperability in a real way. The laser focus for Ed-Fi is around the use cases in the K-12 space, really unlocking student data to be useful in the classroom. And so what does that mean? What does the Ed-Fi Alliance provide, you may be asking? And so there's kind of 5 tenets to our work. The first is the Ed-Fi community, and that's kind of an open source community of states, districts, and vendors that are working towards implementation at various levels of scale. The second piece is the data standard and its governance, and that data standard is completely aligned with the Common Education Data Standards from a vocabulary level. It provides governance around how to implement that, that set of standardized data in a way that is replicable across agencies. Third, we provide a set of technology building blocks, and these are things like our mapping EDU tool to help states and districts map between different data systems, our meta-ed tool to help with code generation in support of implementing the API endpoints. Fourth, there's a set of educator dashboards. This is a starter tool to support really unlocking that data from your previously siloed systems to get data in the hands of teachers directly. And so the dashboards, along with some starter Power BI tools that are available on the Ed-Fi standard, allow that kind of quick win to get data into the classroom. And then finally is the technology exchange, and this is wrapped around the idea that if we have created a common set of technology, we can then share commonly across that. So you'll find things in the technology exchange like extensions for early warning systems, extensions for dashboards that support pre-K information sharing, and other pieces, extensions to capture the data needed for the CRDC reporting. That's something that's coming into the exchange soon. And so this set of 5 building blocks creates the Ed-Fi Alliance. Right now we are currently licensed in around 30 states plus DC and a number of districts. So you may or may not be in a state that has an Ed-Fi license, and we welcome you to explore what that might mean for your state. You may be sitting in an agency and not realize that your state has this license. The licensing for Ed-Fi is free and available to the community, and it really unlocks that support mechanism around the tool. So as we've worked with CEDS over the last 5 years since implementation, or since launching Ed-Fi, there have been at times questions from the community about our alignment and our collaboration with CEDS. So this past year we've made a real effort to both double down on that alignment, but also really be able to highlight the collaboration with CEDS in a way that makes implementation easier and real for states. What we want to avoid is this idea that you have to pick one or the other. We're all in the same boat. We're all looking for the same outcomes in terms of being able to support student learning. That is the goal of CEDS, that is the goal of CIID and the Generate work, that is our goal at the Alliance. So we want to make sure that that everything we do really serves that end goal. And so back in July, we published a set of collaboration guidelines between Ed-Fi and CEDS. And there's 3 principles. You'll see the link to the document on the screen. I'm assuming that these slides will go out or be made available through the SLDS Grad 360 program. So that is a live link. Please feel free to click through and read that. But the general overview on the guidelines is, being able to fully align our existing data elements between the Ed-Fi data model and the CEDS data standards. Taking a look at the new elements that must be added, and sitting down together with our joint community and defining what those look like. And then getting on the same page with release cycles, so we avoid that hangover that sometimes occurs between releases that may cause confusion or misalignment in small cases. What's really exciting about the work that we're talking about today in terms of the Generate project is that it is a project that is really illustrating and taking to scale, taking to reality the guidelines that we've set forth in writing. So between the CEDS team and the Ed-Fi Alliance, it's one thing to pull together a document and put it up on a website. What this Generate project is really doing is allowing us to work through what those guidelines are saying and make a reality, give some realness to how those guidelines will play out. And so that's kind of the general overview. Dwayne, I'll hand it back to you to kind of dive into the Generate project itself. We're really excited about it.
Great, thank you. And I will say this, at any point, since this is a collaborative project, I'm going to be the one presenting on it, but Maureen has all the rights in the world to interrupt me if I forget anything or say anything incorrectly or miss something, so feel free to chime in there as we go through that. And as you mentioned, the collaboration work, literally I was on a call yesterday where we were going element by element with Ed-Fi and CEDS, and I will be on a call tomorrow where we're going to go element by element, basically looking through the mapping. So it's actually taking place, and it's not just something that's on paper. It's we're going element by element. That's how you do it.
Great.
So talking about CIID and CEDS collaboration. So we had previously, we just showed Ed-Fi and CEDS, and now we're taking a look at Generate and CEDS. And obviously, Generate has built the CIID Generate tool, and it's installed by, I'm going to get the total wrong, I know. It's 8 states, but it's probably more than that, but it's at least 8. And so it's installed. They're working on ETL work right now to load the data, but what is essentially the core of that is the Common Education Data Standards database, which contains every element for all of P20W. And as we mentioned before, the focus is IDEA for the technical assistance help that CIID can provide, but there are also the additional files out there that are being built through SLDS that is providing even more of that. And so that's where the collaboration work is taking place there, is that CIID built the tool on the foundation of the Common Education Data Standards. Okay, so on to the actual project itself. So as we talked about Generate, we have the existing state systems there on the left side. And so the data that exists there is probably 50 different custom state systems. Although with Ed-Fi states who utilize the Ed-Fi operational data store, that SLDS box right there may have a much more standard environment of data than what other states would have who have pretty much built it from the ground up kind of themselves. So you have 50 or maybe you have 35 or whatever states that have custom SLDS systems over there. The big challenge is that you have to extract that data and you have to transform it into CEDS and then load it to the operational data store. So we got to move the data into some kind of standard. Standards increase efficiency, they reduce costs, we all know this. They make better plug-and-play environments, they allow us to do all kinds of other things, they allow us to share resources across state lines, and so that was one of the visions related to Generate, is the ability, if multiple states had the same data structure inside of their system with the EDFACS data, they could do a lot more things with that data. And then also the benefit that comes from just the fact that when EDFACS updates a file specification and makes one change to a category set or adds an additional element, that means 50 different states go to work, right? So one category set change results in 50 different states doing 50 different things to have to add that category set or modify that category set. With Generate, one organization changes that in the Generate application, and those 50 states download, or whoever has Generate, right? Those states download the update and the changes already made for the category set. So it's the ability to share those resources. So the biggest challenge that I have in the box right there is that extract, transform, and load in getting that custom data inside of the operational data store. So one of our collaborative things was to talk to Ed-Fi. Ed-Fi has an API that they use. Ed-Fi works with multiple different student information system vendors. Ed-Fi works with, is working with assessment vendors, and we're continuing to help push down into the realm of IDEA vendors to try to get those that build special, keep track of IEP systems, state IEP systems, and those various things, and try to move towards a standard way of being able to extract data out of those source systems. So the project that's in place, the Generate and Connector project that we're looking at, is to basically take the Ed-Fi API and whatever source system is able to expose their data using the Ed-Fi API, that we can consume that directly into the Generate database, which is the CEDS operational data store. So we have the ability to use that API and automatically transform it. So we're essentially building a product that will make its way into the Ed-Fi exchange and would be available for anyone to use, that any source system that utilizes the Ed-Fi API could pull the data out of there, and it can be loaded directly into the CEDS operational data store. So we're working on that presently. That's part of what that call was yesterday, is going that element by element and beginning to work on that project right there. So the ability to move that data from one system into the other. So if you think about some of the different systems that exist out there where you're pulling data, you have your student information systems that many of them already can utilize the Ed-Fi API and can expose that data so that you can pull it through the Ed-Fi API through a standard structure. Special education systems, assessment vendor products. If you just think about the work, having come from a state myself and worked 8.5 years, the effort and work it takes to build just a pre-code file and then send that pre-code file over, and whatever the vendor's structure is that they're wanting or the structure we come up with, we send the pre-code file over. And the students take the test. And then we get the results back at the state and whatever that structure looks like. What if that pre-code file could be sent over in a standard structure through an Ed-Fi API? And then the results could come back automatically through an Ed-Fi API, and all of that could be loaded directly into your CEDS operational data store using an automated process that is standard and recognized across states and across vendors. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for, not just from a IDA perspective, but from big picture, right? So this Connector project is looking big picture, how do we do that? So any product that contains any data at all that's education data that needs to be integrated, the ability to utilize that Ed-Fi API to pull the data out of that location and then load it into the CEDS operational data store, which can then be used for many different reasons, one of which is actually producing your EDFACS files. So that project is underway and is taking place right now, and it will be worked on throughout probably the majority of next year, and we're hoping to have it released sometime following that, so that it'd be available for anyone to be able to use in that capacity. The other side of that project is, as I mentioned earlier, the actual SLDS may be already standard, and it may already be an Ed-Fi operational data store. So states that utilize, not just utilize Ed-Fi, there's some states that utilize Ed-Fi's API to move data, and there's also some states that utilize Ed-Fi's API and their ODS to actually store data that comes from those student information system vendors. So Nebraska is one state that we're working with that utilizes the API, and then they basically bring all their data together inside an Ed-Fi ODS at the state. And so the additional project that we're working on is states that already utilize the Ed-Fi operational data store to house their data. That is their SLDS. The ability to extract and transform that load that data into the CEDS for the Generate project to be able to use that for your EdFax purposes. We're building the ETL work for that. And so you have two projects happening. One is the ability to move any data from any source through the Ed-Fi API into the CEDS ODS, and also the ability to move data out of an Ed-Fi ODS and into the CEDS ODS so that you can utilize the Generate project. That also will be made available in the exchange as well, which is the Ed-Fi exchange once that project has completed, and that will be sometime probably in the next year or so that we'll have that project completed as well. We're going to walk with Nebraska through all of the different files, not just the IDEA files, but also the other files that have been created, the additional 17 for Common Core and CSPR, to work on all of those. And then as, obviously, as Generate expands in its ability to produce more files, I'm sure that projects will be underway to add those additional files as part of the exchange work in that. So that is really what we're looking for, and then we truly can get to kind of a plug and play from source systems into CEDS or from an Ed-Fi system into CEDS, and that is what's taking place. And I think we have some questions coming through that well, let me hold off. Let me see. I got one more thing here. Yeah, we'll just go to this, which is just basically the final slide here, because we figured we'd have a lot of questions that come through. And that's basically Generate, which is the tooler system that's built on CEDS. You have Ed-Fi, which is a standard for moving data in and out of systems. And then CEDS is basically providing that foundational structure under each of those. And I will allow Maureen to interject anything if there's anything I missed. Otherwise, we will start answering some questions that are coming through. We have, does the CEDS operational data store have student-level data? The answer to that question would be yes, it does have student-level data, and that's one of the reasons why it would live locally. It's a locally hosted database that you can install. You can actually go out to CEDS and grab it right now. It just takes a couple minutes to install, but it's the CEDS operational data store, but it would have student-level data inside of it and in a very normalized structure. So if you don't understand normalized, I'm not going to explain it because that would take a long time. But yes, it does contain student-level data to answer that. Another question, is it longitudinal across time? Yes, that is the other component that we have been working with CEDS on and looking at the structure of the NDS to work alongside of CEDS in the collaboration to make sure that it can contain longitudinal data across multiple years. So yes, it does contain longitudinal data. And then we just had a comment, glad to hear, about ETL work going forward with states that already use Ed-Fi. So good deal. The next question, how does it contain, follow-up, how does it contain longitudinal data? Is it snapshots? It actually contains it at the student level. So it can contain snapshots. It can also, but ideally it contains entry and exit type dates, but those could also be done. We're building an implementation guide with the best practices for 2 different types of states. There's probably more than this, but we'll just mention 2 because of the question. One, there are states that collect entry and exit dates for all kids, and so they have they have a broader picture of that entire year of what it looks like when a kid entered, when he exited, when he went into another school, when he came out of that school, what his race was during that particular time period. As we all know, people enter data and people get to decide what their race is, and they change it throughout the year. So the ability to store that in multiple different time slots is inside of there as well. But then there's states that track that throughout the entire year and all of the different changes. And there's also states that take snapshot data. So they know what the student was and where he was on October 1st. They may know nothing else until, let's say, March. Right? And then they have another snapshot of March. And so there's a way to load that data as well into the CEDS operational data store for that time period. So you can do either a snapshot or you can do manage it both ways. And then another follow-up, is it multi-year based? Yes, so there's multiple years that would be contained inside of it. So you would have, yeah, it's a simple answer, yes. You could have 4 years of data in there, or 5 years of data inside of it.
Thank you, Dwayne. We also have some questions in the Q&A box. Don't know if you see that, Dwayne.
I'm moving over to there. I'm looking at the chat. There we go.
All right. Well, I'll read the first one from Yvette. Would you envision that a state that already uses Ed-Fi and has built an ETL into its current SLDS would need to build an additional ETL to use Generate? In SLDS, we filter out some records that are submitted through Ed-Fi due to data errors.
So you may have to follow up on the question, but if we're talking about data that is already inside the Ed-Fi ODS, what we're building with Ed-Fi and working with Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, who's funding this, is an ETL that pulls data out of the Ed-Fi ODS and into the CEDS operational data store. In order for the Generate project, the Generate application to work, it needs the CEDS ODS. So the ETL would then be, what we're working with Nebraska to do is out of Ed-Fi's core ODS model, how do we pull the data out of that and then to make it as replicable as possible from state to state. So they could take that ETL and move data out of the Ed-Fi ODS and into the CEDS ODS in order to use the Generate tool. If that didn't answer it, please feel free to follow up and ask an additional.
Yeah, you can absolutely type something in, Yvette, or our emails and contact information will follow in a future slide. So next, Dwayne, our friend Lane Wiley from Kansas has, what about a connection that would not use the Ed-Fi API? And talking about Generate having its own API that would allow data straight from the district SIS vendors to the state-housed Generate ODS.
So
oh, go ahead.
Well, we actually we looked at that, but it would involve basically the vendors having to create another API, and so why would we do that, right? I think that's kind of what we came down to in discussions with Ed-Fi. Is like, then they would have 2 APIs they have to manage. So if they already are able to create an Ed-Fi API to the state, it's just data moving over the wire. So it made sense to us and also to Ed-Fi and to the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation that we think about Ed-Fi being the API. So if data is going to move out of a system, we need a standard structure to move it out of that system. Let's use the Ed-Fi API. And if we're going to move data into the CEDS operational data store and it needs an API, hey, guess what? Ed-Fi has one. So let's use the Ed-Fi API. So the ability to move data across the wire, we're looking at saying that's the Ed-Fi API. So we're not only building one that takes it out of those systems and into the Ed-Fi or into the CEDS ODS, but also has the ability to move it out of the CEDS ODS and into something else. So the CEDS ODS can expose data through the Ed-Fi API as well. So trying to keep that standard without having vendors have to build so many different things.
Yeah, so Dwayne, just to add on to that, our goals around interoperability really require, both a state and district adherence to a standard, and also a market level play around around that implementation from a vendor perspective. And so what we're hoping to do, the goal around this work and having the Ed-Fi APIs wrap around the CEDS ODS is really to ensure that there's not fragmentation in the market, and that your vendors can continue to be supportive of your efforts around standardization in order to support interoperability for both states and districts.
And Lane, we're happy to work with your CID TA lead Tiffany to schedule some time if you want to further explore and elaborate. And I would also say, we want your feedback. We want to construct this and to build solutions that meet your needs. So we want to definitely make sure that it's understood and it meets what you believe is best for your state and for others. So we have another question in the Q&A box from Peter Tamayo here in Washington. Can the Ed-Fi dashboards be produced from the Generate RDS or reporting data store?
So short answer, no, because it's all that underlying structure, because they're built with a different underlying structure. And when we from our, I'll obviously let Maureen chime in here too, related to dashboards, but some of the things we were thinking were related to a lot of the things coming out related to BI tools. There's a lot of tools that are coming out that are pretty sophisticated as far as Power BI and, Tableau, not as sophisticated, but easier to understand. The ability to set that on top of any structure, as long as the structure is standard, and then the ability to collaborate, I think is what the goal is. And so rather than building from a Generate side, building too many custom reports aside from the EDFACS files, which have very specific, guidelines, the ability to place a BI tool on top of the CEDS, ODS, or the Generate RDS, and to be able to create your own reports. And then if another state happens to use the same tool like Power BI for Microsoft, you can share the metadata, not the data itself, but the metadata and all those reports that you built, the ability to hand that over to some other state who is also using Generate, and they can produce the exact same reports. So there's tools out there already that can sit on top of things, and so we're not sure, at least from a Generate perspective, in moving in that direction, building so many more custom reports as opposed to just finding a way to let states share and use the BI tools they already have in place. And I defer to Maureen for any thoughts differently or whatever.
Yeah, Dwayne, I think that's right. We have the Ed-Fi dashboards are meant to sit on top of an Ed-Fi ODS. There's also some Power BI tools available in the Ed-Fi Exchange. That's all going to be interoperable with an Ed-Fi implementation. And so implementing the CEDS, ODS, and Generate will implement the Ed-Fi APIs, but not necessarily support the immediate interoperability of some of those other tools. And I think as we kind of go down this road and work towards our collaboration, we may be able to get to a place where there's at least an easy lift for transporting some of those things between data stores. I say that from a non-technical lens, knowing that the technical lift is much harder than my easy button that I have in my head.
Well, thanks, Maureen. But I would just reiterate that's the commitment we have with this kind of collaboration. Yeah, the technical solutions aren't as easy as a flip of a switch, but we're driving towards standards in terms of CEDS, element definitions, names, option sets, and standards for moving data over the wire, as Dwayne described with the Ed-Fi APIs. And you know, ultimately, hopefully make it easier for everyone in the community to do their work.
Great, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Just want to make sure we're not missing something. Okay, I see Dan. It sounds like states implementing Ed-Fi ODS would need to host both Ed-Fi ODS and CEDS in order for Generate to work. Any thought on building Generate with Ed-Fi ODS source instead of requiring the step of pushing the data to first CEDS?
Short answer, I'll let Bill take that, but short answer, no, there's not any present thought of doing that. Part of the reason for CEDS being used is the P20W focus of that and the ability to look at early childhood reporting, career tech reporting in the future. You can Perkins, even getting to post-secondary and WIOA. When you start looking at those types of reports, that you would need a much broader operational data store that can bring those components together. When you start really taking a look at, K-12 has got to share some data with post-secondary, post-secondary's got to bring some data back into K-12, post-secondary's got to share data with workforce, you know, you got all these different components, and the CEDS operational data store from a reporting standpoint contains all of those facets from a broad spectrum. That's not to say that somebody in the future wouldn't do it, but at present there's not any funding source or plan to do that, which is why we're really looking at the ETL. We want to make sure that what's available right now can still work, and we have the plug-and-play ability for states that have the Ed-Fi ODS and states that don't have the Ed-Fi ODS, and they can use the Ed-Fi API to move data. So that's the goals at this point.
Thanks, Dwayne. I would just add that the CIID grant that gave us the ability to like kick off this work and to establish Generate required the use of the Common Education Data Standards as the basis for the application that we've been built. It really was following up on lots of engagement and work by OSEP and the folks that focus on data in that office, contributing to CEDS and the standard and ensuring you know, the alignment of definitions and elements and option sets to the required reporting. So it really you know, was the basis for how we started the work. Okay, other questions? I think we have addressed them all. Just want to give folks just a minute to do that. Okay, I believe, Dwayne, you have control.
Yes, and I've advanced to the final slide, which has all of our contact information.
Thank you, Dwayne. Yeah, please do reach out to us with any questions, you know, either directly or, you know, if you want to get on the phone with myself and with Maureen to talk something through and how, you know, how we can, you know, support your needs and your interests. That is what we are available to do. So so let us know, and we're happy to connect with you. So on the next slide, Dwayne, information. So as always on our webinars, we want your feedback. We want evaluation information, and Travis, who's been facilitating the technology for us, has put that link in the chat box. So please go to that link and provide your feedback. And with that, I would like to thank Dwayne and Maureen for the contribution to the webinar today, and to thank all of you who participated. I got about 8-9 minutes back in your day here before the top of the hour. And so thank you very much, and have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you.